The story of the Darksaber begins roughly 1000 years before the Clone Wars, during the time of the Old Republic. Around this time, a Force-sensitive Mandalorian called Tar Vizsla was inducted into the Jedi Order and became the very first Mandalorian Jedi. And as a Jedi, Tar Vizsla made his own lightsaber, which was the Darksaber. Tar Vizsla was also the founder of House Vizsla, and eventually he became the leader of Mandalore. And his lightsaber, the Darksaber, became a symbol of leadership for Mandalorians. After Tar Vizsla died, the Darksaber was kept on the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, and it stayed there until the fall of the Old Republic. And what caused the fall of the Old Republic? Well, back then the Sith and the Jedi were at each other's throat, like they've been for generations, ever since they've existed. But anyways, not long after Tar Vizsla's death, the Sith actually managed to attack Coruscant and sack the place. And during this time, members of House Vizsla invaded the Jedi Temple on Coruscant and stole the Darksaber. And as for the Jedi-Sith war that was going on at the time, well, eventually the Jedi became victorious and the Sith were pretty much destroyed, except for one. And this one Sith was Darth Bane, and he was the creator of the Rule of Two, but that deserves a video of its own. So basically, Tar Vizsla created the Darksaber. After his death, it was kept on the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, and later during the Jedi-Sith war that was going on at the time, House Vizsla retrieved the Darksaber from the Jedi Temple. And after this, the Darksaber stayed in House Vizsla for roughly the next 1000 years. The last member of House Vizsla to hold the Darksaber was Pre Vizsla. And how did he lose control of it? Well, you see, during the time of Pre Vizsla, a sort of ideological revolution was happening on Mandalore. And what was this revolution? Well, you see, Mandalorians, at least some of them, came to the realization that if they didn't forgo their violent nature and stopped getting into all these conflicts, pretty soon there wouldn't be a Mandalore or any Mandalorians on it. Now, something I didn't mention before is that Mandalorian culture is one of violence. And this violent nature of theirs led to them getting into a lot of wars and conflicts over the millennia, which, regardless of their outcome, was horrible for the Mandalorians and their planet. And eventually, during the time of Pre Vizsla, a certain group of Mandalorians realized this and decided to change their culture from one of violence into one of pacifism. This pacifist group of Mandalorians, who came to be known as the New Mandalorians, quickly gained support. This led to a civil war between these new pacifist Mandalorians and the traditional Mandalorians, which after a lot of death and destruction, the pacifists won. And the leader of the pacifist Mandalorians, Satine Kryze, became the leader of Mandalore. And all the traditional Mandalorians, including Pre Vizsla, was exiled to the moon of Mandalore, Concordia. So Pre Vizsla and his supporters on Concordia sat there plotting their revenge. Also, Pre Vizsla still had the Darksaber in possession, by the way. It was not taken from him. But anyways, eventually Pre Vizsla and his supporters teamed up with Darth Maul. Darth Maul agreed to help Pre Vizsla take control of Mandalore for certain things in return, and Pre Vizsla agreed, and with the help of Darth Maul and some of Maul's criminal connections, Pre Vizsla was able to take control of Mandalore and throw Duchess Satine Kryze in prison. But when it came time for Pre Vizsla to hold up his end of the deal with Darth Maul, he didn't do so and betrayed Darth Maul and had him locked up. But this of course did not work. Darth Maul broke out and challenged Pre Vizsla to single combat for control of the Darksaber and Mandalore. So, side note, another thing you need to know about the Darksaber is that it's believed that whoever wins the Darksaber in single combat has the right to rule Mandalore. That's the first part of the prophecy. There's a second part, but we'll get to that later on in the video. So Darth Maul, in front of all of Pre Vizsla's supporters, challenges him to single combat for control of Mandalore. And Vizsla, seeing as how he looked weak if he denied the challenge, agrees to fight Darth Maul, and of course Darth Maul turns Pre Vizsla into Post Vizsla, cuts his head off, and gains control of the Darksaber. So here, by defeating Pre Vizsla in single combat, Darth Maul has become the owner of the Darksaber. But some of the Mandalorians don't see it that way, especially Bo-Katan Kryze, who happened to be the sister of Satine Kryze. So Bo-Katan was a supporter of Pre Vizsla, and after Maul kills him, Bo-Katan says Maul doesn't have the right to rule because he's an outsider and defects from the group. And this group of Mandalorians under the leadership of Bo-Katan came to be known as the Mandalorian Resistance. But we don't need to go into all that here. Point is, Darth Maul has the Darksaber now. Oh, and he also kills Satine Kryze in front of Obi-Wan, by the way, but different story, different video. Anyways, later on, as Darth Maul is sitting in his chambers with the Darksaber, Darth Sidious shows up. Sidious tells Maul that he's become a rival and they get into a fight, and obviously Maul loses. And Palpatine takes him prisoner. Also, it's important to note that Palpatine didn't care about the Darksaber. After he took Maul, he just left the Darksaber in Maul's palace. So Palpatine takes Darth Maul prisoner. Later on, Maul's supporters free him, he comes back to Mandalore and he regains possession of the Darksaber because, like I said, Palpatine had no interest in it. But Maul's rule would not last too long because the Mandalorian resistance, under the control of Bo-Katan, with the support of the Galactic Republic, attacks Darth Maul, defeats him. Bo-Katan is made regent of Mandalore, and Darth Maul is taken prisoner by the Galactic Republic. But hours after this happened, Order 66 is executed, all the Jedi die, the Republic is no more, and the Empire comes to power. And while all this was happening, Maul escapes his prisoner transport ship or whatever with the help of Ashoka Tano. So what happened to the Darksaber when all this was happening? Well, it was still with Maul. Well, not with him at the time, but only he knew where it was. So yeah, Order 66 happens, the Empire comes into power, Maul disappears with the Darksaber. And as for who's in control of Mandalore at this point, well, Bo-Katan refused to work with the Empire, so she was betrayed by one of her fellow Mandalorians, by Clan Saxon, and this guy called Gar Saxon is made leader of Mandalore. And Bo-Katan and her supporters go into hiding, or they somehow escape. We don't have the exact details of how that happened, but that's basically what happened. Bo-Katan was betrayed, and she and her supporters escaped somehow. As for the Darksaber, Maul at some point had taken it to Dathomir. So Maul had taken the Darksaber to Dathomir and kept it in his lair, I guess. And no one would see it again until roughly 3 BBY, which is 3 years before the Battle of Yavin, when a young Mandalorian rebel called Sabine finds the Darksaber in Maul's lair. Of course, Sabine knew the importance of the Darksaber and that it could be used to unite her people. And being a rebel, Sabine wanted to use the Darksaber to unite the Mandalorians against the Empire. So that was Sabine's plan, until eventually she meets Bo-Katan, and Sabine figures that the lightsaber came to her so that she could pass it on to Bo-Katan, who could then lead the Mandalorians against the Empire. And what does Sabine do? Well, she gifts the Darksaber to Bo-Katan, who accepts it. Now, there's a problem right here. Remember that prophecy I mentioned earlier? So anyone who comes into possession of the Darksaber after beating its previous owner in single combat can lead Mandalore. But if one comes to possess the Darksaber without defeating someone in combat, for example if it was gifted to them and they actually accept it as a gift, that will spell doom for Mandalore. And right here, Bo-Katan has done just that. Sabine gifted it to her and she accepted it. So according to the prophecy, this will cause doom to fall upon Mandalore. Regardless of whether this prophecy is true or not, doom did fall upon Mandalore. And it happened pretty much due to Bo-Katan accepting the Darksaber and rallying all the Mandalorians against the Empire. You see, this made the Empire realize something, that they could never truly control the Mandalorians. So what does the Empire do? Well, you gotta remember that this was the Empire at the height of its power. I mean, they could pretty much do whatever they wanted. So instead of running away like the humans at the end of the first Avatar movie, the Empire decides to bomb Mandalore. So the Empire basically sent in these ships and droids to completely destroy the planet and kill everything on it. And the night on which it happened came to be known as the Night of 1,000 Years. But what happened to the Darksaber? Well, it's not clear, but we do know what happened to it, basically. So the next time we see Bo-Katan after she accepts the Darksaber is in The Mandalorian, and roughly 10 years have passed. And when we see her in The Mandalorian, she is looking for the Darksaber. So what happened to the Darksaber? So somehow, when Mandalore fell, Bo-Katan lost control of the Darksaber, and this Imperial guy called Moff Gideon took control of it. And as for how Bo-Katan escaped with her life, well, that has not been explained in canon as of yet. But point is, from Bo-Katan, the Darksaber went to Moff Gideon. But then, as Bo-Katan, along with Din Djarin, goes to retrieve the Darksaber from Moff Gideon, to not let the Darksaber fall into Bo-Katan's hand, Moff Gideon starts a fight with it with Din Djarin, who obviously defeats Moff Gideon, who wasn't a good fighter. And as per the prophecy, the only way someone can rightfully gain control over the Darksaber is by defeating the previous owner in single combat. And Din Djarin does that, and he's now the rightful owner of the Darksaber. So Bo-Katan was looking for Moff Gideon so she could defeat him and take the Darksaber from him, but Moff Gideon messes up this plan by getting into a fight with Din Djarin, who defeats him and takes the Darksaber for himself. But immediately after coming into possession of the Darksaber, Din Djarin does offer it to Bo-Katan, who does not accept it. Probably because she's now a believer in the prophecy and that if she accepts it again, doom will fall upon Mandalore. It's also possible that she blames herself for the Night of 1,000 Years. But anyways, as things stand right now, the Darksaber is in the possession of Din Djarin, aka Mando. And we'll see what he does with it in The Mandalorian Season 3. Thank you for watching, stay hydrated, and have a good day.